Welcome to Recovered Space podcast, where we discuss science and real stories of eating disorder recovery. I'm Anastasia, and I'm the founder of Recovered Space. And I'm thrilled to be a host on this podcast with Dr. David Gardner, leading expert in eating disorder recovery field with over 40 years of experience. Welcome, David. Glad to have you here.
It's great to be here. I'm really pleased to join the conversation.
Today, we have a very special episode focused on debunking the most common myth and misconception about eating disorders. We decided to create this episode because there is a lot of misinformation circulating online in our everyday communication and conversations about eating disorders. And these misconceptions are very harmful because they do contribute to the stigma and shame, and they do contribute to the misunderstanding of the reality of eating disorders. And that makes even harder for people who are suffering to ask for help and for loved ones to give appropriate help and support. And so today, we're going to go through the list of the most common misconceptions that are out there, and we have Dr. Gardner to help us clear all these things up. I would like us to start off with one of the most pervasive myths, which is you have to be underweight in order to have eating disorder. So what's the reality?
Well, the reality is that some people indeed are underweight. That's correct. But most people who have eating disorders are either at natural weight or normal weight, or they are heavier than average. So eating disorders are most common in people that are, over the average weight for their height. And it's important to emphasize that many people that are over the average weight, they struggle with eating problems. They feel like they should be dieting, should be reducing their weight, and they get into eating disorder behaviors very quickly because of their attempts to restrict their food intake. And then sadly, once they get into the eating disorder, oftentimes their binge eating behavior causes their weight to become even higher. So it's a true vicious circle where people end up being at a weight they don't feel happy with. They start dieting, then they may start binge eating and gaining weight. So they end up being at a higher weight than they were when they started.
Dr. Gardner, another common belief is that only women are suffering from eating disorders. Is that right?
Well, it is correct that mostly eating disorders affect women, and they affect women of a particular age, kind of between 15 and 25. But certainly there's a very significant number of men that have eating disorders. About 20% of the cases of eating disorders are men. So the idea that men don't have eating disorders is a myth. It's less common, but definitely occurs. And if you think about 20% of a very large number, it's a very large number. So many, many men suffer from this.
And I believe that I'm sure that for men, it's even harder to talk about this condition because, first of all, people tend to think that eating disorder is something that can happen only with girls. And secondly, which is more important, it's just a lot of shame and not understanding of the condition, and it's kind of not masculine, issue to have. That makes it really hard for men to ask for help, like from professionals even, right?
Well, many men have a particular problem because eating disorders are typically thought of as a woman's disorder. So if you have a woman's disorder, it makes an already shameful experience of having an eating disorder. It makes it doubly shameful because you feel that somehow it's not part of being a man. It's atypical, meaning that it's just something that doesn't happen with men. And so I think people are very reluctant to come forward if they have an eating disorder if they're men.
Please, if you're a man or women, if you're having any problems with food, body, and any concerns, always ask for help. It's not a shame to ask for help. It's the act of bravery.
The reluctance comes from the belief that this does not occur with men. And once you make it clear that, yes, eating disorders do occur with men and they're common with men, then hopefully that reduces the shame associated with thinking that you have a woman's disorder or have a disorder which makes you very weird.
The next one is also about the demographic-related myth, which is only teenagers have eating disorders. Is that right?
Well, it's a partial myth in that eating disorders are most common between the ages of 15 and 25. But people can develop eating disorders later on. But more commonly, eating disorders which appear later on are an exacerbation of eating problems that began earlier. So oftentimes you see somebody who has a flare-up or a real problem that's identified when they're 40 or 50. But if you do a careful analysis of their history, typically they had eating problems back when they were adolescents. So the ages between 15 and 25 are the most common ages of onset. They do occur with older women and men. Typically, the onset of the eating disorder, even in people that are somewhat older when it's manifest, the actual age of onset oftentimes is a bit younger.
Right. Okay, next one, which is really, I don't know, touched me deeply. I don't know why, probably it's kind of personal. Many people think that eating disorders are just about food. Is that correct?
Well, they're not about food per se. They're about restricting food intake. And there are multiple reasons why people do that. An eating disorder is a final common pathway that people enter into for various reasons. And it's not just about food, it's usually about dieting in order to try and improve self-esteem or to deal with other issues, a host of other issues. And there isn't one cause, it's a final common pathway that people get into for various reasons. And food is the subject matter because people are restricting their food intake. But it's not simply about food. That's a very simplistic way of thinking about it.
Right. And can you please tell us a bit more, probably most common root causes why people start using the dieting behavior? I believe it's very important to talk about what potentially could have been this, initial seed, like why people started doing so in order to be who, to do what, to feel how. So that would be very, very great to learn.
Well, it's a very common myth that there is a root cause for an eating disorder. There are numerous causes, both cultural causes, that is living in a society where it emphasizes thinness, or a subculture like ballet or gymnastics, where your performance is judged partly based upon your weight. So there are cultural issues. There are also individual issues. Some of those are personality issues like perfectionism, and low self-esteem, depression. Somebody can experience various forms of abuse. So there are various causes, but there's not just one cause or one initiating event. And then there are factors which are related to kind of the genetics. People who are somewhat heavier in terms of their body weight may be more prone to try and diet and reduce their body weight. So I think that there are cultural factors that are important, and there are factors within the family. Sometimes families can be over controlling. I think it's a mistake, as we'll talk about later, to blame families, but some family environments where there's a high emphasis upon perfectionism and high performance standards, sometimes in vulnerable people, that can be a factor that initiates the eating disorder. So the myth is that there's a root cause. There are many causes that converge, and all of them converge in the same way in dieting behavior. So people try and restrict their food intake to try and deal with either the individual personality factors, the cultural factors, or family factors that may be contributing to their eating disorder. And then, of course, there are perpetuating factors. As soon as somebody starts dieting, they develop starvation symptoms, and this may perpetuate the eating disorder in a complex manner. So there is no root cause. There are many root causes that lead to a final common pathway of dieting in order to increase one's self-worth. But I think one other important point to make is that sometimes people can develop an eating disorder without any psychopathology. They don't have initial psychopathology. In other words, living in our society, particularly if you're a woman, or also men as well, but certainly women are constantly pressured by social media, by society in general, told that they'll be happier if they lose weight. Think of the number of ads on television for weight loss. They always present somebody as unhappy, and then when they use this weight loss product, all of a sudden their life gets very much happier, much more pleasant. They feel much better about themselves. So obviously, there's tremendous cultural pressure on people to lose weight in order to feel better about themselves. So sometimes dieting begins for innocuous reasons, just kind of a normal wish to feel good without a lot of underlying psychopathology. And so that's one of the reasons why a self-help program can be very helpful, because some people do not require in-depth psychotherapy to recover. They just require really good information and also the tools to proceed along the path toward recovery.
It's kind of bright, the end of the tunnel, that not everyone is very bad. That's very good to hear, like very inspiring to me anyways. And let's talk about the next myth, that you can tell if someone is having eating disorder just by looking at them. Is that right? Is that true?
Well, it's one of those partial myths, because if you see somebody that weighs, um, 40 kilograms and has lost 25 kilograms in the last year, they look thin and they look emaciated, and they do attract attention of people around them because of their thinness. But that's the minority of people with eating disorders. Most people with eating disorders are normal weight or above average weight. And so looking at them, there's nothing about them that would cause someone to believe they have an eating disorder just because of their appearance. So the big myth is that eating disorders are always characterized by thinness. They're characterized by a wish to be thin, but not thinness.
I'm listening to you and I'm processing my own feelings because back then, when I was suffering from bulimia for many years, no one really, so everyone literally thought that I'm doing great, like I'm doing all right. Because just looking at me, I was like normal weight, probably a bit heavier weight for someone, or as people told me, some people told me that I was heavier than someone, like average. I don't know what's average even mean, not right now, but back then I believed in that. Probably someone can relate to this. It's kind of this inner dialogue that happened to me. One part of me really wanted that someone saw that I'm having bad time, but another part was brilliant in pretending everything is good, I'm looking good. And when I started my recovery, I told people around me, my family, my parents, even the few people at work, because I was bringing my food to the office just to keep my meal plan going. I told them that I entered recovery from eating disorder. So first of all, when I said I entered recovery, people asked me from alcoholism. I was like, no, from eating disorder.
Mhm.
So and it kind of suggests that they had no idea. They was like, did you feel bad? Yeah, for nearly 5 years. Yes, it's very, and the reason when we are talking about this, and I'm giving my personal example, is to ask everyone just to be cautious and caring about the things you say to other people, about the compliments you make to other people, because you will never know. Like eating disorders and disordered eating, such a common thing, unfortunately, in our society. Just think twice if you really want to compliment someone's look, or you better compliment someone's hair and smile or perfume or whatever else. So thank you, David, for
Sure.
for debunking this as well. And next one, I can stop whenever I want. So I'm in power of my condition. I'm the ruler and I can stop it anytime I want. What's the reality here?
Well, the reality is that most people don't really know how to stop it. They may say, I want to stop it, but usually what that means is I want to stop overeating. I want to stop binging. Typically, people don't have the technical knowledge to actually implement a plan that would lead to recovery. So it isn't just about self-control. It's about an overall plan of taking care of your body in a way that is healthful and respects your body's need for calories, for food. And so when people just want to stop, usually that means I want to stop binging. But since dieting is one of the causes of binging, typically people don't say, I'd like to stop dieting. I don't hear that very often. Say, I want to stop binging, or maybe throwing up, or engaging in other weight controlling behaviors. But they typically have trouble with the whole idea of restrictive dieting being something that needs to stop. Sometimes people don't recognize when they have a real problem and what the nature of the problem is. So, for example, oftentimes people will develop an eating disorder. Let's just say they're maybe 5 or 10 kilos over what they think they should be. So then they begin restricting their food intake and they lose 5 or 10 kilos. Here they've achieved what they consider to be a very important goal. They feel better, they look better, and they're getting compliments. So when they're in this particular position, it's very hard for them to say, I have an eating disorder and I want help. Why would they want help if they've achieved something that's very important to them? They don't realize how they're beginning to go down a rabbit hole where they will start in binge eating, and the binge eating will continue to be cyclical. It will continue because of the dietary restriction. So oftentimes people don't realize they have a serious problem early on, because mostly they think they have not only no problem, they think they have a solution. They've got a solution to being a bit overweight or being heavier than they want to be. So trying to decide to get treatment oftentimes happens once you develop complicating symptoms like extraordinary binge eating behavior, self-induced vomiting, laxative abuse, or some other extreme weight controlling behaviors. And once you start having physical complications, that oftentimes begins to set the stage for contemplating recovery, or at least treatment. So people can't decide to have an eating disorder, but they can choose when to get treatment. It's best to get it early on, but sometimes it's difficult for people to make a choice to get treatment if they don't think they have a serious problem. In the early stages of an eating disorder, people think they have a solution, not a problem.
Have any idea in mind what can be of help, for people to recognize that they probably have an eating problems earlier than later? Because what comes to my mind is actually just basic education, kind of bringing awareness about what's eating disorder, how it looks like, and if you experience X, Y, and that, you're probably not a very good state, or probably have any other ideas in mind what can help to get this understanding for people earlier than later.
Well, I think information is the best way to get treatment earlier. So, for example, if you do not really recognize that dietary restriction and weight loss is a major factor that leads to binge eating, then you wouldn't actually know that that you need treatment. You'd think mostly you need to stop or control your binge eating behavior. So you wouldn't really believe at that early stage that there is a problem, or you'd have not a clear understanding of what the problem is. You'd be focusing exclusively on the binge eating or vomiting behavior sometimes not vomiting behavior. Sometimes people will think that binging is the big problem and vomiting is the solution. Well, they fail to recognize the vicious cycle of the eating disorder that does lead to a spiral downwards. And so I think the way, I guess, to get treatment earlier or get help earlier is very, very good information. If you have information that is solid that diets don't work, that helps. If you believe diets do work, well, that's going to prolong the period of time in getting help.
Thank you for clearing this. So next one what I want to talk about, it's about failing at treatment. So some people tend to think that if they failed in treatment, that means that they can never recover. How someone should think about that if they failed treatment?
That's a huge myth because oftentimes people will fail treatment because they just don't have enough understanding of the problem and how serious it is. That it doesn't really deter them, and so they continue after treatment with the difficulties. Very, very importantly, many people get poor treatment. Many people get treatment that's inadequate. If you look at the treatment literature, that, for example, many people in many treatment facilities are discharged at a weight that means that they still have a serious eating disorder. So they'll be discharged at a body weight, or they'll fail to gain any weight in the treatment center because of the inadequacy of treatment. So they really won't have received proper treatment. So saying that you failed treatment misses the fact that sometimes treatment fails you.
Yeah.
So first of all, you need to have very, very good, high quality treatment. And then sometimes people have 2 or 3 episodes of treatment or 4 episodes of treatment before they actually somehow it becomes clear to them the only way that they're going to get better and stay better is by pursuing all of the tools that they learn in treatment. So failure at treatment can mean failure of the treatment. It can mean that you're not ready for it, but you shouldn't be discouraged, because I've known people that have been in treatment many times and finally get to the point where they say, okay, I will embrace all elements of recovery.
Yeah.
And then they do well.
Okay, next one, David. It's very interesting. Are parents to blame for eating disorders? It's a very common statement, I would say. And now, can you please tell us if that's the myth and misconceptions or it's reality?
Well, I think that oftentimes the history of certain approaches to psychotherapy, or the theories behind psychiatric problems, really place heavy blame on the family. So many theories postulate that disorders are typically the result of parenting or the family environment. Sometimes families can be contributory to making things worse. Mostly, the issue about families that's important is, can families embrace recovery? Sometimes most families want to do the best for their children.
Right.
Most families really try hard to be good. Parents try very hard to be good parents. But sometimes, for example, parents can be a complicating feature. For example, once they learn that treatment involves some degree of weight gain, that can be a real source of conflict for parents. They don't want their kid to be at a higher weight. Now, that doesn't happen often, but it is an important dynamic which does exist in some cases. So parents don't cause eating disorders, but they can be very helpful in terms of assisting in the process of recovery. So it's a myth that parents cause eating disorders. It is a truism that they contribute in a very important way to recovery. It's important to remember that oftentimes people that have eating disorders don't fully recover. Let's say a woman who might have an eating problem then has children. And if the woman is feeling horrible about her body shape, and if thinness is a very important ideal, this of course can be transmitted to the children, where many parents who do have eating issues, either formal eating disorders or milder forms, or just hate fatness, they can then transmit these particular attitudes toward their children. So there have been studies of parents who have eating disorders and how this affects children, and it can have an effect. But I don't want to back away from the true myth here, and that is that parents cause eating disorders. There are instances or ways in which they can contribute, but for the most part, they want to be positive influences, and they're alarmed at the fact that their kid has an eating disorder.
I believe the last misconception I got for us today to discuss is about the eating disorders and sexual abuse. Like that eating disorders always indicate previous sexual abuse. What's your take on this?
Well, first of all, that is definitely a myth, that all eating disorders are caused by or the result of sexual abuse. It is true that about 30% to 35% of people with eating disorders have a history of sexual abuse. So it is common, and more common than in the general population. However, it is no more common than it is with other psychiatric disorders. So in psychiatric disorders in general, about 30 to 35% of people have had some traumatic events in the past or sexual abuse in their history. So it is more common in eating disorders than in the general population. But it's not more common in eating disorders than it is in other psychiatric disorders.
It kind of made me thinking and asking the last question. Is there any specific approach to treat eating disorders for someone who unfortunately had sexual abuse?
Well, I think people that have sexual abuse, it really indicates a general vulnerability. That vulnerability can express itself in depression, anxiety disorders, other psychiatric disorders, or eating disorders. And I think there are some very good treatment approaches to try and address people that have sexual abuse. I think it's beyond the information in this podcast, but I think they're very well established and well known treatments for trying to help people with trauma in general. So I think that there is hope out there for people that have had sexual abuse. And oftentimes it's important to understand that sometimes people that can have sexual abuse and have no psychiatric problems at all. It's certainly terrible to be the subject of any kind of abuse, and we would wish this upon no one. But it's important to understand that it just confers a general vulnerability to psychological problems.
Thank you for bringing this up. Actually, David, that's all I've got in terms of misconceptions that I found like online and based on like literally Google search and Reddit and Facebook. If there anything else that we didn't touch?
Well, I think it would be really important to invite people who are listening to this podcast to write in questions they have about things that they think may be myths, or are they accurate or are they inaccurate? Because I think there are certainly other things that might be considered to be myths out there. But I think it would be good to give people the invitation to communicate with us and bring up concerns that they have and ask about whether or not a particular idea is true or it is a myth.
Please leave your questions and comments below. We do read them all on every platform. On YouTube, we have TikTok, we have Instagram, so we are everywhere. So if you find that you like watching us on TikTok, please go and do it. We will leave all the links in the show note captions, and you are very welcome to leave any questions and concerns. And we're here to...
And there's one final myth that I think is important, and that is some people ask the question, is it possible to recover using self-help? for using
Great
guided
question.
self-help like recovery space.
Right, yeah.
And I think it's critical to point out there have been research studies showing that guided self-help can be very effective with many people. Not for everyone, but for many people. And it's an economical and a very palatable way of going about approaching recovery, because you can do it in the privacy of your own home oftentimes, and you can do it at your convenience. It's oftentimes more expensive than it would be if you were uh, engaging in formal psychotherapy. So people do recover through self-help and through guided self-help. So please keep that in mind and remain optimistic as you pursue your recovery, the recovery process.
I believe that's all for now. Thank you, David, so much for being with me here today and bringing this clarity and this reliable knowledge for people. And I just hope that that will be helpful not only for people who are suffering, but for the general public, whoever gonna watch this, in order to spread awareness and make sure that we're becoming better people every day and we are caring and compassionate to each other.
It's a great closing comment.
Thank you.